All right, the next speaker I'm not going to introduce because you all know who he is, so it would just be a waste of my time. It's Randal O'Toole, and he's got some thoughts on the future of transit and how we actually get people where they need to go while making it affordable, which, as you know, is really not how we do transit in this country in most places. So I'm going to go sit down.
Well, for years, we've had a hard time when people ask us the question, what is your vision of transit? People say, we say, well, we're against wasteful rail transit. Well, then I say, well, why do we even add the word wasteful? Because that's redundant. We're against rail transit. Well, does that mean you're for buses? Well, the more and more I look at bus systems, I'm not really for buses either. I'm not really happy with our transit system at all. We need to look at our history and see what transit is all about. 100 years ago, this is 1915, most transit was by streetcars, and over 800 American cities had streetcars. A few cities had elevateds and undergrounds and so on, but mostly it was streetcars. And then my hero, Henry Ford, developed a moving assembly line 101 or 102 years ago, depending on who you read, for the automobile, and within a few years, transit ridership was plummeting. You can see it actually peaked in terms of per capita, and this is per urban resident, not per U.S. resident. Per capita urban transit peaked in about 1920 at about 290 some transit trips per year per person. And then along came the Model T, and it just plummeted. It just declined almost in half. The Depression helped a little bit, but even before the Depression, it had fallen quite a bit. During the war years, it went back up because of gas rationing, and then it crashed again until about 1970. It was about 50 trips per capita per year per urban resident. Since then, we have put, in today's dollars, roughly $1 trillion into transit. And between 1970 and 1995, the per capita transit ridership grew from 50 trips a year to 38 trips a year. Since then, it's grown a little bit. It has grown a little bit. It's now up to about 42 trips a year. It's hard to tell whether that's just because of higher gas taxes, higher gas prices, or it's because of the economy, or it's because the money that we're putting into transit is actually doing something. We've increased ridership per capita ridership by 10% since 1995. Now, if any transit advocate shows you these charts, their numbers always start in 1995, because that was the lowest point transit has ever been, and then it has gone up a little bit since then. So their charts, of course, show this tremendous growth from 38 to 42 trips per year.
These are not boardings, right?
These are
not boardings.
These are probably boardings, yeah. These are actual. Well, yeah, they're boardings.
Boarding always the riders.
That's not a big difference. It doesn't change much over time. The ratio of boardings to trips is much over time. Now, supposedly, the reason why we have transit is to help people who don't have cars, or can't drive, or don't want to drive, or whatever. It turns out only about 4.5% of American workers live in households without cars. About 92% of all American households have at least one car, but about half of the households that don't have cars don't have any workers. They're all retired or whatever. And so they don't have any cars, so they don't need them. Of the 4.5% of people who live in households without cars, about 40% of them get to work by transit. But that means more than half don't. Transit doesn't even work for most of the people who live in households without cars. So it's not working for these people who are supposed to be the target. In fact, in most urban areas, you can see drive alone and carpool add up to about 30%. In the majority of urban areas, drive alone and carpool add up to more than the percent of people who ride transit. And in a near majority, driving alone adds up to more than the people who ride transit.
How do you
Now
do that?
remember, these are people who live in households without cars, and yet 20% of them are driving alone to work. And in some cities, it's almost 50%. And the answer seems to be that they're driving in employer-supplied vehicles. And that's just really just a guess. But this is numbers from the American Community Survey based on a survey of about almost 3 million people a year. And the numbers are consistent from year to year. Now then we say, well, we need to get people out of their cars and onto transit to save energy and protect the environment. That's become the raison d'etre for transit agencies lately. The problem with that is that it doesn't save all that much energy or protect the environment. Nationally, transit uses about 3,200 British thermal units of energy per year, and driving a car uses about 3,300 British thermal energy units of BTUs of energy per passenger mile. Not per year, but per passenger mile. So there's a slight savings, but if you take New York City out of the equation, cars beat transit. And almost every transit agency uses more energy per passenger mile than cars. Probably a majority of transit agencies in this country use more energy per passenger mile than somebody driving alone in a Hummer. So transit is not energy saving, except for in New York and a few other cities where you have really high transit usages. About 6 to 8 cities where transit is a little bit more efficient than driving, but not a lot. Okay, so the car has killed 85% of transit ridership. Transit ridership has gone from 290 trips per year to 40 trips per year. That's an 85% decline. My argument is that the other 15% decline is right around the corner, thanks to the Google car. Thanks to the self-driving cars that Mark told us about. And we have a bunch of different companies that are developing these cars. We've heard of Google, we've heard of the Audis, we've heard of some of the others. We've heard a little bit about Tesla. We haven't heard much about Apple. We know that Apple is hiring engineers who have expertise in self-driving cars, but they won't admit that they're even developing a car. We don't know what they're doing. But anyway, there's a lot of companies doing it. Mark mentioned the Tesla. I want to show you this video, which was, if you haven't seen it on YouTube, it shows somebody, and I hope the audio is loud enough for you to hear this guy talking about what he's seeing. Basically, Tesla owners woke up one morning and found that their Teslas had downloaded new software. And they got out on the road, and let's go.
Which is incredibly fun, but the fact that it can do all that it's up, and you can see on here, the vehicle in front of you that's following, and you can see where that is in its lane. And you can see all the sensors going back and forth on the dashboard display here. Oh my gosh, it's changing lanes on its own. Oh my gosh, it's changing lanes on its own. That is wild.
Okay, the Tesla is the first commercial vehicle that will change lanes on its own. If you set a target speed of 40 miles an hour and a car in front of you is going 35 miles an hour and there's an available lane next to you, it'll change lanes and pass that car. Now that's a technology that has been developed by various companies, but this is the first commercial car that does it. And it's also the first commercial car that does software downloads so that as they find bugs in their system, as they improve the system, as they add new capabilities to the system, it just downloads it to your car. So you don't have to buy a new car every year, which might not be a great business model for Tesla, but since Tesla is, they're trying to capture 99.99% of the market from the other manufacturers, they probably don't need to worry about that yet. But I drove here from Oregon in my Subaru with adaptive cruise control, and I'm kind of angry that Subaru doesn't automatically download new features to my car that they put on the 2016 and they're going to put on the 2017 models. Okay, so self-driving cars combined with car sharing, Uber, Lyft, these other companies. We're going to have to ask, okay, well, what role does transit have in a world where we have self-driving cars and car sharing? The people who can't drive, who are presumably riding transit, the people who don't want to drive, who are presumably riding transit, they're going to be using self-driving cars and car sharing. And the cost is going to be far lower than transit. The average cost to carry somebody on transit, a passenger mile, is almost $1. The average cost in your car is about 25 cents. And car sharing is going to, according to Uber, is going to be even less than that. Now, maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll be 40 cents. Maybe it'll be 50 cents a passenger mile. But it's still less than $1, right? And rail transit, of course, is a lot more. So where are we going to need transit in 10 years from now when Uber has 1 million Teslas, self-driving Teslas out on the road picking you up and dropping you off wherever you want to go? Well, first of all, there's Manhattan. Manhattan, south of Central Park, has about 7 square miles with 2 million jobs in it. And 77% of those workers take transit to work. I don't think there's any possible way that self-driving cars could cram that many people into that small an area and get them to work on time. So, New York is still going to need transit, okay? You look at other American cities, nowhere else comes close to 77% of downtown commuters taking transit to work, but Chicago is 57%, the rest are, on this chart, are about 50%. So if you imagine that self-driving cars will double the capacity of our roads, if that turns out to be true, then you can take all of these transit riders, except in Chicago, you can take all of them and put them in self-driving cars, and they don't need transit in any of these other cities. Chicago maybe does. Chicago has over 500,000 jobs in the loop. And as it showed, 57% of them take transit to work. Those other cities, they're around 200 to 300,000 jobs in their downtown areas. And only about half are taking transit to work. Washington, D.C. has probably more than any of the other cities. I think it's the third after New York and Chicago. It has 380,000 jobs downtown, but interestingly, it's one of the least congested downtowns I know. There's almost no automobile traffic on these big, broad streets. Don't you feel that way? It's really hard to get into downtown because the road networks getting into downtown aren't very good, but there's this height limit. You can't build a building taller than the Capitol, and so because of that height limit, even though there are a lot of jobs downtown, it's not really as dense, and a lot of people are taking transit. So I think it's going to be very easy for car sharing to take over when the Metro Rail is finally rusted into dust, which isn't going to be very long from now. It might be a tie or a slight race to see whether car sharing is available before Metro Rail is rusted into dust or afterwards. I don't know. For those of you who don't know, Washington, D.C.'s Metro Rail is a total disaster. 20 years ago, everybody thought it was wonderful, and now nobody's maintained it in 20 years, and 30 years since they started building it, and there are almost daily severe accidents, delays,
And
whatever.
riders and rail riders, Metro Rail riders are
Ridership is
declining
declining,
as
yeah.
job
Yeah.
growth continues to increase in the city.
I was there a couple of my trips ago, I was there, and half the trips I rode on were delayed by 20 minutes or more.
Do the feds fund that system?
The feds funded the construction, the locals funded the operations, and nobody funds the maintenance. So that's why there's a problem. And the maintenance is a hidden cost of rail transit. They never talk about it when they propose to build a line. After when the line gets to be 30 years old, like the highways, it has to be completely rebuilt. And they call it maintenance. And they call it the capital improvement, but it's really maintenance, and they don't very rarely have money to do it. So I don't see that we really are going to need transit in these areas if car sharing, if self-driving cars will double capacity for these streets, for these areas. Now we have the next tier of cities, starting with Seattle. About 37% of downtown Seattle workers, there's 180,000 workers in downtown Seattle, 37% of them take transit to work. So even if car sharing only increases capacity by 50%, not double, then all of these cities, there's not going to be any need for transit. I think it's going to come closer to double than 50%, but even if you think it's only 50%, then these are the only cities that are going to need transit in the future, and these won't, and nowhere else comes close to 50%. I mean, Denver at 20% is 12. nowhere else has anywhere that kind of percentage of people taking transit to work to their downtown area.
What's your definition of the future? How far out before, this,
10 years.
you think 10 years?
Yeah, 5 years, the technology will be pretty much there. We'll work out the bugs, Uber will buy the fleets and so on and so forth. 10 years from now, if I haven't been able to upgrade my car with software, it'd probably be possible to upgrade my car with software to make it into a self-driving car. So we're going to have a rapid adoption of this technology.
You'll probably be able to buy a kit from J.C. Whitney to do it.
Yeah.
Randall, I've always heard Houston has a third downtown. Your stats didn't show that a third of the downtown workers ride the HOV bus.
It might be a different definition of what the downtown is, but I don't think it's that much in the definition I have. I'll show you my numbers. My numbers are Wendell Cox's numbers. So we can look at his numbers, and Houston does have a big downtown, but I don't think it's a third.
7% of people work downtown.
7% of the jobs.
No, but 7% of the people who work downtown, what percent of the people who work downtown get to work by transit?
Ride the HOV.
Yeah, and maybe Wendell has a more expansive view of what downtown is than the view that.
Okay.
Question on this transition, what is it about self-driving cars and our fueling this? Is it the cost, is it the fact that they can use the roadway more efficiently? Or is it they don't need a driver to?
I think it's that, the advantage that cars had over transit 100 years ago was that they were much more convenient. They were faster, but they were much more convenient. They go when you want to go, and they go from door to door. And the advantage of self-driving cars is that they do that for everybody. You don't have to be 16 years old and have a driver's license to use a self-driving car. And not only that, because they will relieve congestion, they will speed up traffic, it'll be even more convenient and even more attractive to use.
They speed it up because of.
In general,
Because of less congestion,
What?
of less congestion.
in general, I'd like to hold questions to the end because Mark, who also did self-driving cars, may have some issues, and maybe Trey has some genius knowledge from Austin and the Google cars driving around.
Thank you. I only have a couple more slides. Really, I think today the main constituency for transit is the transit unions. Also the rail transit contractors, but they only are involved in about 30, 40 different cities. Basically, it's the transit unions. And this is a kind of a scary slide. In Portland, my former hometown, the transit agency is a champion in the fact that they have the highest level of unfunded pension and health care obligations relative to their annual operating budget of any transit agency in the country. It's more than 3 times, their unfunded obligations are more than 3 times their annual operating budget. New York MTA is almost 3 times. And you can see down the list, Los Angeles is 108%. I left off some of the smaller agencies. Buffalo is about well over 200%. Just for comparison, Houston and Dallas are around 20%. Their unfunded obligations are 20% of their annual operating budgets. Austin is 15%. So here's a place where Austin is actually better than Houston or Dallas. So the question for your transit agency, wherever you are, is not what kind of big, grandiose bus facilities should be built downtown, what kind of big, grandiose bus lanes or rail transit should we build, but how are we going to transition ourselves from today when we have at least a constituency of riders who are paying 20% of the cost, to the time when we basically have a bunch of zombie transit systems that exist for the next 40 to 50 years to pay off the pension and health care obligations of the former transit employees who aren't needed anymore because we don't have transit anywhere outside of New York, Chicago, and maybe 1 or 2 other cities. Well, that's the end. I would argue that with transit is a dead man walking, and we need to start thinking about this, and all our transit agencies need to start thinking